Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friday of this week. And welcome to everybody who joined us in Santa Fe over the past couple days. It was nice to see you, whether it was on Zoom or in person. It was great. So I'll go ahead and get us started so we can turn it over to Dana. She's got some great information to share today. All right. So we'll start off with our land acknowledgements. New Mexico Alliance of Health Councils humbly recognizes and acknowledges we are on unceded territory and ancestral lands of the original peoples of New Mexico's Pueblos, Apache nations, and the Navajo Nation. Together, we acknowledge the history of genocide, dispossession, colonization, and the ongoing systemic inequities while strengthening and respecting relationships with Indigenous peoples. We give thanks to the past, present, and future stewards of this land and respect all tribal nation sovereignty. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous resiliency, self-determination, and self-governance of New Mexico's tribes and nations who are still here today. Okay. So again, we are being joined by Dana Kiernan. Oh, I just asked you and I'm so sorry. Kiernan from Virginia Community Voices. She's the lead program manager and data analyst. So she'll be sharing how they use data in their community with stories and active listening to share power. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dana.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today, and being here to listen and learn about what we do at Virginia Community Voice, and specifically how we use data. And throughout the presentation, if y'all have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, or even just come off mute and ask them. Or if you have comments, or you're like, oh, I didn't think about this, or oh, here's how we do it, please, I appreciate when folks share their own experiences, and I would love to hear from all of you as well. So with that being said, I'm gonna share my screen, and also a couple of caveats. My dog is with me on my chair, so sometimes she likes to get up. If that happens, I will have to help her up and down. So she's old, she's 13, she gets what she wants. Okay, let me get ready to share my screen. Screen 2. Okay. All right, though sometimes in the chats, y'all, sometimes I can't see it while I'm presenting, so sometimes it's easier if you just come off of me. So, okay. Let me rearrange my screen so I can also see my notes to make sure I don't forget anything. All right. So, like Sam said, this presentation is really going to highlight how we use data at Virginia Community Voice, or VCA, and how we collect it, how we share it back with community members, and how we use the data that we do collect in our projects and our programs. So that's where we're going today. All right. First, I'll share a little bit about us. Virginia Community Voice is a 501c3 organization with a mission to equip neighbors in historically marginalized communities to realize their vision for their neighborhoods and prepare institutions to respond effectively. Our vision, it's a big one, is to build a commonwealth where decisions are made equitably. We do this through 2 programs. So the first one is our RVA Thrives program. It's how we do direct community engagement and community organizing with the Southside neighbors in Richmond. And for those who are not familiar with the Richmond region, totally fine. It's the opposite side of the country. The Richmond city is gentrifying, if you will, and the south side of Richmond is sort of the last area that is mostly Black, and it's sort of ripe for gentrification. So that is the area of the city that that Virginia Community Voice works in, to really organize folks to be able to stay in their neighborhoods, right? To not sort of become displaced because of gentrification, and also so that they can see what they want for their community to live and to thrive. And so that's our one program. The program that I support is the Community Voice Blueprint, and it's the part that prepares institutions to respond effectively to community voice through training and coaching. And so basically we take our lessons learned, we take our blueprint model that we use in the South Side, and we share it with other organizations and institutions. That was my cat. Full of animals here, friends. Full of animals. A lot going on. Okay. So before we get started, I really do want to share about power and how we think about power at Virginia Community Voice. And I think it's like particularly relevant today to how we think about power and who's in power right now. And so I'll start us off with like a couple of questions just to think about. And so like, where does our power come from? Who confers it? Who has it? And most importantly, who is really listened to? And so culturally and historically, we've identified specific cultural norms that dictate the power structures that we work within, especially when it relates to community engagement and community organizing, and even the nonprofit world. And so these are paternalism, transactional relationships where efficiency is valued over meaningful relationship building, defensiveness, equity washing, which we've seen a lot of, and now sort of a rejection of, or I guess maybe the culmination of equity washing is being able to reject DEI or whatever you would like, or other ways to think about it are like rainbow capitalism, green capitalism, just signing on to lofty values but never acting on them. Comfort with white leadership, and then also perfectionism, right? The fear of making mistakes or being wrong. And so we find that this happens a lot with nonprofits and in community engagement and community organizing spaces. And so this is like a society ends up devaluing ours and others' inherent power while prioritizing and valuing like political power and economic power, which oftentimes disenfranchised communities don't have. And so also in organizing, we're taught that power comes from organized people and organized money. And if we want to make the changes that communities like want to thrive, especially when their resources are scarce. Oh, hi, Rodney. Especially when resources are scarce. It's because these communities have been systemically divested from. And so we really have to organize people. And so I understand also you all just had like a big organizing people day. That's awesome. So that's very cool, very relevant. And so basically at Virginia Community Voice, we believe in the we power of organized people. And so each person has inherent power and autonomy and goals and hopes. And we bring these people together around shared interests. And when we do that, we build that power. We build the people power. And this type of power really matters more than ever because political leaders really continue to show us that they are valuing money over people. And another issue with organized money is that it can be pulled out, right? It's not a guarantee. And so political power can come and go, organized money can come and go, but people power, when you organize folks around things that they care about, they're gonna stay, right? They wanna see those changes made. And so it's almost self-sustaining because people are gonna keep showing up for what they believe in, but it also, not to say you don't have to do any work, it takes a lot of work to get that continued engagement. And so that's what we do at Virginia Community Voice. But really, what does that, have to do with all of us here? And so for organizations that want to do better community engagement, we also have to acknowledge that we hold power in communities. Like as nonprofits, we have money, we have people, we have time, we have resources, all behind our objective. And sometimes, whether we mean to or not, we end up gatekeeping them. And like we try to reject that at Virginia Community Voice as well. And so we reject that by using our community voice blueprint model, which we'll get into in just a minute. And so in short, we really work to not give power back because people already have that inherent power, but we work to make sure that people's voices are being heard, that their stories are being heard by the people that are currently in power and organizing folks to be able to come together around these issues. And so we know you're here and listening today with us because you are interested in learning about it. And so without any further ado, I'm going to get into our community voice process. Unless y'all have questions or thoughts.
Hi, Dana. Thank you so much. I have a
Yeah,
question about maybe the membership of your nonprofit and what that looks like.
sure. Do you mean like the employees?
Yeah, employees and maybe like partners as you're kind of like on this topic around, power dynamics and out
Mhm.
city.
Yes, thank you for that question. Um, I would say like our racial and ethnic makeup, I think, oh my goodness, I think I might be the only white person. I think I'm the only white person left. We had just our grant writer has just moved on to another position. But we're mostly Black and Hispanic or Latinx, and then me. Oh, that's so funny. I just realized that. Um, and the like makeup of it is we have folks who live in Richmond as like our executive director lives in Richmond. Um, oh, thank you. Okay, Flo, my supervisor is here. So ask the hard questions. Perfect. And we have um community advocates who are folks that like live and work in the community and are like members of the community that we are working in. And some of our funding partners, a lot of them are Virginia based and a lot of them are Richmond based. Um, and I feel like I can get into a whole separate conversation about our fundraising principles, which are actually I was getting into this a little bit, but have you all ever heard of community centric fundraising or like the ethical rainmaker? They have like a whole philosophy around how to push back against sort of like traditional nonprofit fundraising about, you know, how it can be really harmful in communities and then what do communities get out of it. So we've actually come up with, oh my gosh, why can't I remember what they are? Community centric fundraising principles for our own organization about how we hope that funders will interact with us or partners will interact with us, which is including like trusting Black leaders. Oh my goodness, it's been a while, so I can't remember all of them, but I can follow up with you all. Let me write this down. Follow up about our principles and how we work with our partners. Mhm. And I know we were in our executive director and our grant writer who just left. They were both on a podcast for the Ethical Rainmaker, and I can also send that out. Mm. Thank you for that question. Okay. So now I'm going to be getting into our community voice process. So we have a 4-step community voice process. It's listen, connect, craft, and reflect. It's cyclical as it shows in the diagram. And also, I'll give it away now. The reflect piece happens like after each stage. So we're always constantly reflecting, constantly making sure that we are not doing harm in communities, that we're doing things well, and then pivoting if we need to. Okay. So this is like the main heavy part that really involves listening. And so we are constantly using data at Virginia Community Voice to listen to our neighbors to inform our projects and programs. And we have some general guidelines about how we do this and how to listen well, and it really influences our data practices. So first, we listen to stories, to people's stories, particularly those who feel unheard. This pivots us away from who gets listened to traditionally, right? So those with power, those with money, and often those of the US racial majority or like white people. So that's just what it is. And so when we talk with marginalized communities, we know that many times their stories and experiences have been purposely excluded and ignored. And so we're really very intentional about wanting to hear about the experiences of those who have felt like their experiences have not been heard in an authentic way. And so, again, as an institution with power, with resources, with community connections, we have to be the ones to listen and respond and make room for the community to make decisions about their neighborhoods and even what happens within our organization. And we've set it up that way. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. And so we're also really very careful about not extracting people's stories for our own gain. And we see this happen all the time with nonprofits, and especially when it comes to nonprofit fundraising, right? Like I was just saying. Um, and so a lot of times what we see, what we've experienced is that nonprofits will take and use people's stories of hardship to draw folks in, to like individual donors, to larger funding institutions, and we really reject this practice. And like I said, there's a whole movement that we're following, that we're a part of, called community-centric fundraising. It's part of the Ethical Rainmaker, like I guess umbrella group, and also some of our fundraising principles are based off of trust-based philanthropy. So if you all are interested in that, we recommend looking up Gabrielle Alcalde. She has many different resources out there about trust-based philanthropy. And so we also know that when it comes to this work, we are not exempt of having biases and making assumptions about the communities that we serve. And so when we're in conversation and when we're in collaboration with communities, we have to do it in a way that tests our own assumptions about what we think we know about communities. And so we really need to try to understand communities from their perspective. And so I'll give like a very brief example. When we were going through our first listening process with our Southside neighbors, safety came up as like a big problem. And so we thought it was kind of about gun safety, but it actually turns out when we did some digging and some more listening, community members were really concerned about pedestrian safety, which is not at all gun safety. Pedestrian safety is very different with very different solutions, right? So we have to be able to listen and check our assumptions. And so we also really have to be open to diverse sources of knowledge and center lived experiences, and not coming in with what, like, for example, what we think the community needs. And so oftentimes what happens, right, is you'll look for community level metrics of thriving. And so they have it, it's like education, high school graduation rates, income, poverty levels, right? So if we had just used sort of high level metrics of data, we would never have been able to really understand what the community wants. Again, for like safety, we probably would have gone in with an education program because the high school graduation rates weren't as good as other parts of the city, right? But education didn't come up at all when we did, well, not at all, but it wasn't the top priority for neighbors when we did our first listening session. I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a minute. And so the way we really do this is we have a data sweet spot, and it has three different pieces. There's historical context, disaggregated data, and lived experience. And so for historical context, we like to research, at least for folks that are coming in who are not part of the community, like myself, we like to research at least 50 years of history in the communities where we're working, or whether you're investing in it or organizing, because the issues that are identified by community members today are not something that happened, overnight. They were often designed, and you can go back and look through the history of the community to help understand why that community looks the way it does. So for example, Richmond has a history of redlining. So I feel like everyone knows what it is, but just in case, it's how banks purposely would not let people invest in specific neighborhoods because they were Black neighborhoods. And so a lot of the issues that Richmond and Southside face today are because of that historic policy from like the 1930s. So again, these issues that are brought up didn't happen overnight. So it's really important to understand the historical context of the area that you're living in or working in. We also use disaggregated data because it tells a more nuanced story and highlights inequities that can be glossed over when lumped together with high-level data. And so disaggregated data just means like it's broken out by race, by ethnicity, by gender, by income into smaller data sets so that we can see different stories emerge and differences between groups. And again, aggregates all just like rolled up into one. So like a metropolitan statistical area, something like that. And we usually use publicly available data such as census data, housing data, labor data, health data. But we also do collect our own data through surveys or conversations. And so we break it down by identity and demographics, and we separate the data out, again, to tell the different stories, between groups. And then last but not least, and probably actually most important, is lived experience. And so when we go into communities, we don't just like enter in and say, here's what's going to be happening, right? We want to understand folks' lived experiences. And so during our surveying process, and sometimes in lieu of our surveying process, we perform one-to-one interviews, which are like a specific organizing tool. I'm sure many of you know what they are as compared to in-depth interviews. We also do those, and we also hold focus groups or community conversations. And so for folks who are maybe unfamiliar, one-to-ones are a specific community organizing tool that are used to uncover people's self-interest, which is just another way of saying like, what keeps you up at night? Like if you're at 3 a.m. and you wake up, what is that thing that's bothering you? What can we organize you around? And then in-depth interviews or focus groups and community conversations for us are usually used to get into like a deeper conversation around a specific topic. So that's sort of the context of our data sweet spot. And I also have a video that I'll share that sort of highlights our data sweet spot. It is of Miss McQueen, who's in the picture here. She's one of the longtime residents of Southside. And to give a little background, when we were going through the census data, we saw between the 70s and the 80s a big demographic shift in the neighborhood that she lives in. It went from all white to all Black. And I'll leave it at that, and then I'll share a little bit more after her video. Oops, how do I get there? With my mouse.
In the 70s.
When I first moved here in 1970, this neighborhood was virtually all white. But then we had the real estate dealers to come in, and they would send letters, the same as they're doing today, to us, to tell us that they want to buy our homes. But during that time, they were saying that Blacks were moving into the neighborhood, and therefore the value of the properties were going to go down. And that caused a lot of families to decide that they didn't want to stay, that they were going to move out and move somewhere else. And so gradually the neighborhood became virtually all Black.
Right. And so for us, that really highlights the importance of understanding Miss McQueen's lived experience, because we could have made assumptions, once again, about, why we saw that demographic shift, we might have come up to the realization that it was white flight and block busting. But Miss McQueen tells us that's what it is, right? We don't have to guess about it. She's saying this is exactly what happened in our neighborhood, and here's why we're having so many issues today. And so really understanding and connecting folks around their lived experience is so important for this work. Okay. And I'm also gonna share another in-depth piece about like how exactly we do this at RVA Thrives. And so I'll get into that too. And then I'm gonna pause for questions after this little piece. So another important aspect of our work I want to highlight is that we don't stop at listening, right? There's always an action that follows or actions that follow. And I want to compare this with like other nonprofits, and especially, I don't mean to be mean, to academic institutions, but to academic institutions where a lot of times folks will go into neighborhoods, they'll collect, community level data, and they're often never seen nor heard from again. And no one is really sure where that data goes or how it gets used. And like, what was the point of all of this like effort that I put into sharing my experiences with you or answering this survey? And so we are dedicated to not do that, right? So we always want to have an action that is community centered and community thought up, community driven at the end. And so we also have a pretty unique way of surveying the neighborhood. At least we think it's unique. We haven't seen other people do it, though perhaps you all are. So if it's not unique, tell us that as well. So what we think is unique about this process, besides the data sweet spot itself, is how we collect information from folks and what is done with it afterwards. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of the history and the story of Virginia Community Voice. And so before we went into the Southside community, our executive director already had a working relationship with a few of the long-term residents from her time with another organizing group. And so this is an important aspect of like relationship building. She already had a working relationship with many people. And so the executive director, knowing these community leaders, asked if they would be a part of a steering committee that we were setting up, and if they would help us prepare a survey to collect preliminary neighborhood data. And so my former colleague and I designed a survey to measure community trust, how willing people were to get involved with civic engagement. And then also we asked what the best aspects and most challenging aspects of their neighborhoods were. And so once we had a first draft, we shared it back with the steering committee. And they did not hold back their constructive criticism, and that was fine. They really told us this survey is not going to work the way it's worded, the way it's written out. It was hard to hear, but it was necessary. And it also takes a lot of trust for folks to be comfortable giving that honest feedback. And I really want to highlight that that trust came from the executive director's long-term work with community members already, right? Because if you're an institution and you're coming in and you're saying, give us your honest feedback, like a lot of times trust has been broken between institutions and communities. And people are probably going to tell you just what you want to hear. And so I'm so grateful that that's not what happened. Like I said, a lot of constructive feedback. And so after 2 or 3 iterations of the survey, we had a final survey. Then we hired local community members to distribute the survey at $20 an hour. We went over the survey with them. We trained them on ethical research practices. We shared what the survey was going to be used for and what the data would be used for afterwards, like the whole process. And then we asked them to ask their friends, neighbors, family, church groups, etc., to take the survey. And so having people from the community administer the survey was extremely important for us because I mean, you just get a better response rate when you're not being asked by complete strangers to fill out this survey. Like if I were to go into the Southside neighborhood as myself, I don't think I would get as great of a response rate. I'm not from the community. I don't look like the community. And it's like, who even are you? Who are you? And that's fine. I'm fine with that. It makes perfect sense. And you're just more likely to trust giving your information, taking the time to fill a survey out when it's your next door neighbor asking you, when it's your pastor asking you, and being able to share with you exactly what this data is going to be used for, instead of, like I said, just some random person showing up and asking you to do this. And so from like 2017 to 2018, we collected more than 1,000 surveys from community members sharing what they wanted for a thriving community. And like I said, in order to get a deeper understanding of the lived experiences, our executive director performed 100 one-to-one conversations, while other team members conducted 50 recorded interviews and 5 focus groups to ensure we understood what the results of the survey were saying. Like I shared before, safety was a big concern. It was not gun safety, it was not violence, it was pedestrian safety. And if we hadn't taken the time to do those extra steps, we would not have known that. And we also don't stop there. We make sure that we share the results of these surveys, back with community members. We did this through community meetings by disseminating the results to our community hires who actually administered the surveys. And then they were able to share back with their contacts, with their friends, with their family, with their churches. And again, we didn't stop there. Our goal is action. And so we want a thriving Southside community. So we ended up, we moved on to the connect phase. But before we do that, questions, folks, any questions? Or comments, concerns, thoughts?
I'll ask
Okay.
you in your
Oh,
process of the 3 attempts for your survey to be finalized. Um, what was the period that it took to do that process, more or less?
Thank you. That's a great question. It took a few months. It was not quick. It took a few months of one researching the survey and like finding validated survey questions, finding time for community members to meet, getting the feedback, incorporating the feedback. It took a few months. So I would say maybe 2 to 3.
This is a great presentation. Oh my God, it's so refreshing
Oh, thank you. Thank
to
you. I
see
feel
this
like
from a new generation perspective. And I just applaud you for sharing this with us. I hope I can share this presentation. But I wanted to say how big was the community? Thank you.
oh, thank you. Oh boy. Offhand, the neighborhoods that we work in, I know the census tracts because I work in the census data all the time. It's 602, 79. There's thousands, multiple thousands of people in the South Side community. Unfortunately, I don't have like the exact number offhand, and I think it would take me
Oh,
a few
okay.
minutes to find it. But I can
Because
also follow.
in McKinley County, we got, well, in Gallup, we have about 20,000, but on the weekends it fluctuates to 70 to 100,000 because it's a border
Oh,
town. So
wow.
it's very interesting how the survey had to be tweaked. Yeah, I'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah, and I didn't include it in this presentation because I cut this one down for time. It's normally 2 hours, but also I see another question in the chat, which I will get to. But for the survey, we did try to, at least with our responses, because we got 1,000 responses from our survey. So that is the part of community engagement that we got the most responses from. And we really tried to make sure that it like matched the demographics of the community. So we wanted mostly Black responses, and then followed by mostly Hispanic responses, followed by white responses, just so that it sort of mirrored what the community looks like. And I'll be honest, we failed at getting the Hispanic population, to the Hispanic community, to respond to us. The first time that we did this, we didn't do the deep engagement that had already been done with the Black community, with like the Black community leaders. And we really thought that just like translating the survey was going to be enough. It was not. And so that was like, I'll say we failed at that part. But I'm proud to say we have since recovered. We put the time, the money, the resources that is needed to do that deep Hispanic engagement, especially with like migrant communities. Oftentimes in Richmond on the South Side, it's where people are newly arrived from whichever their country of origin. They start out on the South Side of Richmond and then move out to the counties later. And so, yeah, we did not do a good job the first time engaging the Hispanic community. But like I said, we did recover. We do have, I would say, in our steering committee and working groups now, 2 of our working groups are bilingual all the time. So it took us a few years. It was not, again, overnight, and it was a significant investment of time and money, but we felt it was really important. It was definitely a learning experience for all of us, but we felt it was extremely important to include all of our neighbors to have a say in what they want for their community. I'm not sure what that chat is, but I'm going to ignore it. So if y'all have any more questions.
I would like to have a
Yeah.
conversation with you because in McKinley County, we're going to revitalize the Deconstructing Racism New Mexico survey. So
Ooh.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can put my email in the chat. And you know what? Sometimes I might not be the best person to ask, but we'll get you in contacts with like who might be better. I'm perfectly fine admitting that, but we'll work on it. Oops. Definitely reach out to me. Did I spell community right? Sometimes my typing. Okay. All right, friends, for the sake of time, I'll keep us moving forward. But again, anytime you have a question or a comment, you want to just come off mute, that's perfectly fine. Okay, oops, let me find my mouse. This brings us to our connect phase. Okay, so what I also want to highlight about Virginia Community Voice, which I think makes us kind of unique, is that we are basically like a framework or a mechanism by which neighbors work. So I like to think of us as a tool, and we're always actually trying to work ourselves out of a job. Like, it's our goal to not always be in Southside. We want to be able to go different places and replicate this model. So again, what this sort of means is that we're the mechanism which holds space for neighbors to meet and connect around these issues. And so we did this by creating the steering committee. And after we had our survey results, out of like 11 major issues that rose to the top, our steering committee of Southside neighbors, Southside residents, picked 3 to work on addressing. And so after we had those 3 topics, we established working groups again of community members to come up with solutions to address these topics. So that's like a quick overview of the structure of how RVA Thrives works. That's our RVA Thrives program. And so again, the steering committee sort of directs where the working groups focus their efforts.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
You might have said this and I might have missed because I was answering an
That's
email,
okay.
but how many people were in the steering committee?
Ooh, oh my gosh. I think you guys are asking hard questions today. I think there's I think there's 11 people on the steering committee, but also Rodney is part of our steering committee, like 12. Thank you, Flo. Yeah, 11 or 12. And right
They're
now
mostly, sorry, go on.
oh, go
Sorry.
ahead. Well, right
No,
now
I was just going to ask if they're mostly community members or like what kind of
They're
spread
all.
of them. Okay.
It's all community members. It's all Black right now, but we're working on bringing on our Hispanic neighbors as well. So our goal is to grow it to more like 15 or 20 folks, which is kind of big for a steering committee, but we want to get all those perspectives in, and we want to make sure that it's multicultural as well. So we're working on it. Not perfect. We're in the process. And so thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Okay, so that's like a little bit of how we connect everyone. But I also want to talk about why we connect and why connecting with each other is so important. And again, it's like basically about building and sharing power. So this is like the first part. We listened, we heard what all of the issues were, and now we're connecting people around those issues. And so what we mean by connect is literally connecting neighbors with shared interests to each other, and also to local leaders and institutions, as appropriate. But it's also not just as simple as introducing neighbors to each other. We have to take the time to develop trust, both from the institution to the community, and then also among community members. And so in our survey, we did ask about this. We asked a question like, do you trust your neighbor? Do you know your neighbor? And we knew that we had some work to do because many respondents didn't know their immediate neighbors. And they also didn't really have any opinion on whether or not their neighbors were trustworthy. And like the biggest response was neither agree nor disagree. So we knew that like people didn't distrust them, but they also didn't trust them. And so we really took the time for our steering committee members, for our working group members to get to know each other, to develop trust with and amongst each other, and then also go back out into the community to share about this work and build trust that way. And so, like I said before too, there's also like a distrust of nonprofits, because nonprofits, they come and go, they extract data and then often disappear with nothing having been done to help. And so we also knew that we had to repair some relationships with community members, even though we weren't the ones that had, come in and done all these things before. It was important to acknowledge that this had happened, that organizations have done this, and share how we were going to do something differently, even if we weren't the ones, again, that caused that harm. And so also in this stage, one of the ways that we build trust is that we really aren't setting folks up to fail. So for many neighbors, it was their first time coming onto a decision-making body where they're going to be making collective decisions about their communities. And so if it's like your first time doing anything, even stepping into a new role at a job, someone has to be there to prepare you to do that, right? To establish the norms together, to share like what the expectations are. So we didn't just put everyone in a room and say, good luck, you got it, make some decisions about how we're going to change things. We like really shared how like leadership, how we expected people to, you know, lead and learn. So many people had to learn new processes and be prepared to step into this role. And I mean, and that's like a universal experience for everyone. Everyone has to learn something new. So we just make sure that we took the time to do it for our neighbors as well. And so really in this work, we also recognize that we can't do it alone. So during this process, we also identify people and groups that we could ally with or ally our neighbors with to implement these solutions alongside our neighbors, and also help them access like social capital and like money capital as well. And so, right, we helped identify key decision makers and people in positions of power who can support or impede their progress around these issues. And yeah, basically, yeah, just connecting folks around their shared interests. And so I think maybe the big takeaway for this section is like really building trust is going to be the most important factor to successful community engagement efforts, and helping neighbors discover their shared interests and facilitating their relationships and building up those civic advocacy skills is really going to what really moved our efforts and our work forward. So I love showing off pictures of our neighbors and of our work. And so what this looked like for us is we started first building trust by listening, identifying shared interests, and then we like set up space agreements, like how we all wanted to be treated in the space together. What happens when there's tension? What happens when there's disagreement? What happens if people really can't come to a decision? How do we work through that together? Because there's always going to be tension, there's always going to be disagreements, but how do we come forward, move through that stronger and still as a cohesive group, right? We're all working towards betterment. How do we make sure that we always keep that in mind? And again, this phase, this trust building, really can't happen without the listening phase and making sure that we've developed those strong relationships with our neighbors. And I can just give like a quick example of one of our working groups. And so for an example of our connection, like a connection, is our beautification process, which has also now turned into our greening group. So neighbors in our survey and our interviews, they shared their concerns about their neighborhood, like not looking beautiful. They didn't have a lot of pride in their community because there was trash. People weren't keeping their yards up, right? It just doesn't feel nice when you come home and your neighborhood doesn't look nice. And so they shared their concerns, the neighbors scoped the issues. We connected folks with allies, decision makers. And so we started community cleanup days. And then we started off sort of hosting them, putting them together. And eventually they became so regular that community members now do that without our help, without our input. They just do it whenever they want to. Excuse me 1 second. Oh, I'm used to talking so much. Oh my goodness. And we sort of taken a step back on doing that, but the neighbors continue to do that on their own, which is like always the goal. And so that's one of the quick examples that we have. Okay, any questions? I'm gonna rush through these last ones. Sorry.
I
Oh,
had
Alex.
one. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Oh, I just had one quick question.
Mhm.
You mentioned some of the demographics, but like
Mhm.
for age, how did that pan out?
Age. I'm so glad you asked that. Most of our steering committee are older. Most of the working group members were older. It's changing now. We're getting more younger folks, and I say younger, I mean like 30s, to join in. And we also we have one of our programs, it's the ARCA program. It's the Arts, Racial Reconciliation, and Civic Advocacy program, and that's a youth program. for Black and Latinx youth, and they do art together. And some of those, I want to say, some of the youth from that group have transitioned to being parts of our other working groups. And we're also working on having youth voice in our steering committee. Again, not perfect, but we are actually working on that. And by youth voice this time, I mean like 14 to 18. But originally it was mostly older community members. And again, that's like, I feel like a lot of times that happens. Older folks are retired, they have time. It's a little bit easier for them to be involved with community stuff. But now the demographics are shifting a little bit, especially the Hispanic community. A lot of our neighbors involved in the working groups are, I would say, middle-aged versus older.
Great. Nice. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, thank you for asking it. Okay, so we got our craft stage, only 2 stages left. And this is about crafting solutions, right? And many times institutions, like I said, will look at these high-level metrics and determine for communities what they need, very paternalistic. We are not going to do that. And so we really want our neighbors to be the ones that decide what to do in their communities, right? And really have ownership over these issues and over the solutions themselves. And so our working groups and our steering committee, the structure that we have set up really reinforces this type of power sharing with community members. And we like to think of ourselves like as a resource for these groups. They share their ideas. We'll go and research if it's been done in other communities. Sometimes the ideas that they have been done elsewhere. And we've been able to connect to those outside communities to understand how those solutions were implemented there, how it could work in the Southside community. And other times there's novel ideas that we try to figure out how to implement together. And so an example I'll use is for our housing working group. Our neighbors, after seeing how successful the beautification efforts were concerned, like, if our neighborhood looks good, people are going to come in and try and buy us out of these places. Like, how do we prevent gentrification from happening? How do we stay in our community? And so that really grew into the housing working group, where neighbors, we researched together and we saw another solution that happened in the Twin Cities, is in Minnesota, where they came up with the housing development scorecard. And so that was put together by neighbors in those communities, and they put their priorities down for what type of development they wanted to see in their neighborhoods. And it's a negotiation tool to share with developers, to share with the city, to say, are you hitting all of our criteria that we want for these developments? Not that you can't come in, but are you hitting the criteria that we want here? So we did a similar process with our Southside neighbors. They crafted the solutions. This included both our Hispanic neighbors and our Black neighbors and our white, all the neighbors in Southside. And they came up with their own housing scorecard that had different priorities than the one in Minnesota, but the priorities that were for the Southside neighbors. So it's like greening, it's maintenance of infrastructure that's already there, it's food access and security. And so we know that not every development is going to be able to hit all of the points that they want, but it is a starting point to say, like, hey, if you can't give us this, maybe you can work on something else here, or have you considered doing X, Y, or Z? And so again, we listened, we connected folks around this issue, and they crafted their own solution to it. Even though it had been done someplace else, it's what neighbors want to see in their own communities. And I think that's probably one of our most successful examples of how the blueprint process works. And now our goal for that is to make it into a city ordinance to say, whenever a neighborhood has a scorecard, a housing scorecard, we want developers to go in and to these communities to see what they want and how they're going to hit all of these priorities. And if not, again, not all of them, it's a negotiation tactic as well. So we're really pushing to get, like I said, a city ordinance passed about that. So that's our next step there. But okay, so what I really want to highlight too is also that these solutions are designed equitably, meaning that they're including the most marginalized voices. And again, that they're centering the lived experiences of folks who are directly impacted, and the solutions aren't furthering disparities. or other inequalities. Like, again, when we talked about beautification, some of our neighbors were upset that people's properties weren't being taken care of and they wanted to call code enforcement. And that was the solution for the neighbors. And it was like, okay, well, do we want to get them in trouble and have them pay fines and make it harder for them to maybe clean up their properties? Or are there other ways we can try to engage our neighbors instead of furthering that disparity and making it harder for folks? So sometimes we have to pull back a little bit, and the neighbors agreed with that. They were like, you know what, we didn't think of it that way. We don't want to make it harder for folks. We really just want it to look nicer. And so the truth is, right, like if all of our solutions were designed like this, designed equitably, we wouldn't have many of the issues that we're having today. So really, again, it's about putting power back into the hands of the people that know best. And oftentimes power not only means deference to the decisions being made by the community, but putting that money and the resources behind the community as well. Okay, so some examples. Like I said before, the safety one again was about pedestrian safety, which gave birth, if you will, to ARCA, the Arts, Racial Reconciliation, and Civic Advocacy youth group. This is them in the picture where I kind of hide their faces, but their solution to pedestrian safety was slowing cars down through this intersection. And this street in particular, many folks had said people speed through here. They're afraid to cross the street. They're afraid to walk their dogs. They're afraid to have people have their kids come out. Someone's dog got hit and killed. One of our neighbors, like, it was a whole thing. People were very upset about how fast people were driving. And so the youth did some research and they learned about traffic calming measures. And so we worked with 2 local artists to help run the group, and they came up with street murals in intersections that had in the past been the most dangerous one. There had been car accidents, pedestrian accidents, bicycle accidents. So this is the first one that they did, and then they did 2 more along this the Richmond Highway corridor where there were some other issues. And so for us, that's another really great example of letting the community come up with their own solutions and also then helping them implement them. Like, again, we were just a tool for folks to implement their ideas and their solutions. So our beautification, again, turned into a greening working group. Rodney is actually the head of our greening working group. I saw him on here. He started off as a community advocate and is now running that group. We also have our housing with our equitable development scorecard. And then we're also creating a South Richmond Center for Health and Well-Being, which is going to be a space where people can come together and do like collective healing, community healing, and like find places to rest and hopefully have a garden and also some affordable housing. We're working on it. We're on a whole big thing. We'll get there. We're having some troubles with finding the land, but we're working on it. And so that's some of the solutions that our neighbors have come up with and that we have been able to and lucky enough to be able to put time, money, resources behind. Almost done. Okay, I promise we're almost done. Okay, the last piece is reflect. There's Rodney again. And so in our reflect stage, it's really one of my favorite phases where we get to learn and understand what worked and what didn't work for the community, and whether or not like what we did was good or bad and was helpful or was it harmful. And I also want to make sure, again, I say this, we reflect after every stage. So the listening stage, we reflected and we thought and we found, like I said, we did not do a great job of including the Hispanic community at first. After the connect phase, what could we have done better? How could community members have, done X, Y, or Z better? What could we have done better? And so we are always continually reflecting on our actions. But in the reflect phase, we work to gain an understanding of what works and what didn't work. We use community feedback to hold ourselves accountable. And we also don't reflect simply because it's required for a grant, like, how you have to hit certain specific grant requirements. We wrote into the grant, we have to do it. We don't do it just for those reasons. And we believe that by constantly reflecting on our process, it helps us course correct before causing harm in the community. And so how do we do this? We Of course, we do activities, we do focus group or surveys, we hold one-to-one conversations. And then we also have community members help determine our goals and if we've reached them. And we ask folks specifically, like, how could we change and do it better next time? What felt good to you? What didn't feel good to you? Do you feel like your voice was heard in this process? Why or why not? And we try to measure this through conversations and focus groups, and like changes in collective efficacy and collective decision making. And we learned that surveying is not always the best technique to try and get these responses. It's really the conversations that are going to draw the responses out. But again, you're not going to get real, honest, true answers without having built that trust up ahead of time. Because if you're like the organization, again, you come in and you have the power and the money and the resources, and people are afraid you're going to take that away if they don't give a good response about how you've been doing, it's not going to be as effective. And so you really have to build that trust up to be able to get that honest answer and the honest feedback. And I'll hurry and speed through. Oh yeah, this was just about how we did not successfully engage the Hispanic community, but I already talked about that. So we'll skip this slide. And that's question and answers. And then last but not least, I'll obviously give time for questions in just a second, but I did want to promote our human-centered workplace. It is a cohort-based learning program that we're starting in March about how to change like institutional policies and practices to make it more human-centered and like a better place to work for folks. For example, like I'm gonna just talk about how much I love Virginia Community Voice, but I can't help it. We have really like generous leave policies. We have rest breaks built in, and all of us as employees have spoken into what we need in a workplace that would make us better able to thrive both at work and it's just like a human in general. So we thought like other people might want to learn about this too. So we have that coming up. And then also we do like first Wednesday conversations. We're trying to rebrand it, full disclosure, as Curious Conversations, but I keep saying first Wednesday. But it's like about just like different topics about community engagement. And it's not always us talking, like we have guest speakers come in, we have community members talk. So just about, racial equity and community, how to do community engagement, and just be in spaces with other like-minded people. So come join us. But now I'll go back to the question and answer. So if y'all have any questions, I'll take myself out of screen share actually. So we can all like see each other. If you have questions, feel free to ask or comments.
It's not really a question. I just wanted to comment and say it was really brilliant, the scorecard and looking at the neighborhoods and what they wanted, and then actually putting some action behind it and trying to get an ordinance passed. That's really, really, really smart. Good job.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, don't thank me. The community came up with this.
Well, yeah, but you guys all together is who I'm thanking. I'm including everyone in this.
Okay. Yeah, we can send you more information about it. Like our scorecard, we have where's our website? I'll send it out. Scorecard website. Add that too to my follow-up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I tried to go to the Ethical Rainmaker website. It's down right now or something.
Ooh,
I'm not sure.
Whoopsies.
Yeah.
Well, try community-centric fundraising. That one might be working.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Anthony. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your presentation. And as you were talking about this for the past 58 minutes, I was thinking about being in Santa Fe and looking at the homeless people that were near the Capitol and how the legislation inside the Capitol was going to be charging them for being out in the streets and putting them in jail for a few months. And I thought, this is how things should have worked just upon how you were describing things. And I think nationally, we're looking at the things that you talked about in the beginning. Is the power, the economic power that we're seeing, and that the community voices have been numbed in terms of what the president and his billionaire people are doing. And so this is something that I think maybe if you can talk to anybody in the Republican Party, because it filters all the way down to even at the state level, the line of thinking that they're going through in terms of listening to the state legislation that is going on. is that they're all following the two main items that you talked about in the beginning, is the power and the power of economics, and to listen to everybody. And we're headed in the last caption that you did as a country in terms of failure. But I like I got some ideas on how to talk now in terms of the power and the different levels of power and the different types of power. And I would like for you to include language as a power issue and culture as a power issue. Because if you live in quote a gated community, you are going to have different economics. If you live on a reservation, you are going to have different economics, and along with that, different cultures, and along with that, different languages. And even as a person living in such a community, sometimes you may not have the get the needed trust from the people in power only because maybe you don't know how to speak the language. Anyway, those were my comments. It was a good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments, Anthony, because you're so right. Like there is a whole specific language that gets used in like political spheres, or even if you're just in like a different socioeconomic group. And sometimes you can't break into that because you just don't know, and it's a different culture entirely. And also with language barriers, like even just knowing English, right? If you think about our Hispanic neighbors, knowing English either a little bit or fluently is either a barrier to being, getting services, being accepted, understanding what's happening around you or not, right? Like, so that's a really important piece. I'm going to add it in. So thank you.
I just want to chip in and agree with him. I grew up in Alaska, and one of eventually they rectified it, but the government was basically sending out very important documents and surveys, stuff people needed to access services, and they'd be in English and maybe the major tribal language, but they'd be sending it to these rural areas where people would not be speaking either of those, and they would just be underserved or not served at all. It was really bad.
Yeah, we have a similar challenge in Richmond where it's not just people are immigrating from like Latin America or South America, but sometimes they don't speak Spanish, they speak their indigenous language. And that's actually, we haven't been able to move past that barrier just yet, but it is something that we're aware of and something that also happens in Richmond. Yeah.
I know we're a little over, but there was another question in the chat asking, what does your funding structure look like to fund projects at the local level? Also, thank you. This has been great.
Oh, thanks, y'all. Funding structure. We rely a lot on grants. It's mostly grants. A lot of our grants will directly fund projects. And also, I think I forgot to mention that we also pay it's like probably the most important thing I forgot to mention. We pay our steering committee and working group members. They are not volunteers. We pay them $20 an hour for their time to fairly compensate them. If we're getting paid for our time, they should be getting paid for their time. And so we write that into grants. Ahead of time, we fundraise specifically for that. And it is one of our line items. And usually how we do it in grants is we say that it's like a barrier removal fund. And that's how we sort of, I don't want to say get around paying people because people are like, well, shouldn't people want to help their community just to help their community? Like they should want to do this, but like we also want to help the community. We're getting paid, so they should get paid too. Anyway, so we often do that as like a burial removal fund. And then, thank you, Tiffany. I'm trying to think of the other structures. Yeah, it's mostly grants. We rely very heavily on grants and then like donation campaigns. Is that the question? Am I answering it?
Yeah, and Dana, could you
Mhm.
also clarify any of that like state funds from like your local Department of Health?
Yeah, usually, again, that's usually through grants or like contracts to do specific projects. I'm also not super involved in the granting or funding, even though I have worked in that space before with Virginia Community Voice. But Usually, again, it's in the form of grants. Sometimes we're asked specifically to apply for specific grants because we have those connections with, for example, the state or the city health departments, or like the Office of Sustainability in Richmond, and they'll say, hey, we have this money available. We're going to put out like a request for proposal, an ROF, a request for funds. I'm forgetting the 3 letters, but they'll ask us to apply or they'll provide us with grants.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else anybody would like to ask while we have Dana here with us? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing all about this incredible, work and focus you're putting on the community to make sure that, voices are actually a part of it. I'll send the slideshow and this recording and everything, as well as the link to the community scorecard that was mentioned in our Monday Health Council information. But if you have anything else, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can always connect you with Dana if she's comfortable with that.
Yes, absolutely, everyone. I welcome your I welcome your questions. I welcome all of it. So please get in contact with me.
Holly, did you want to say something? Or is that just like a clap?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I know what it's like speaking to a room full of people with just a couple of faces. So I'm just so you know, there's a bunch of really grateful and appreciative people here today who have really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful you all are here. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me speak at you for an hour. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, everybody have a great rest of your day, a good Friday, and a fantastic next week. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, have a great day.